Eat and drink but do not exceed. The Holy Prophet said that a Muslim who lives in the midst of the society and bears with patience and afflictions that come to him is better than the one who shuns society and cannot bear any wrong done to him. Islam enjoins man to devote all his energies to the reconstruction of life on healthy and moral foundations. It teaches that both moral and material powers can be welded together and spiritual salvation can be achieved by using material resources for the betterment of man in the service of just ends instead of running away from the challenges of life. An establishment of an equilibrium is strongly desired by the religion of Islam between both the material and spiritual aspects of life. Complete way of life. Islam as a religion has a wide horizon and a scope. It is not only restricted to the private matters and affairs concerning an individual, rather it deals with all the fields of human existence. It carries within its teachings a complete guidance concerning the individual and social, material and moral, economic and political, legal and cultural, national and international. It also clearly states that its objectives are the purification of soul and the reformation of the society. As Quran says, "We verily sent our messengers with clear proofs and revealed with them the scripture and the balance, that mankind may observe justice and the right measure." Islam is a complete way of life as it integrates man with God, awakens in him a new moral consciousness and invites him to deal with all problems of life in complete accordance with his commitment to God. Universality and humanism. God in Islam is the God of all the world. In Islam there is no distinction on the basis of color, creed, language or nationality. All men are equal in the eyes of Islam, and it insists in the removal of all the impediments on the basis of status, wealth and social status. O Lord, Lord of my life and of everything in the universe, I affirm that all human beings are brothers to one another. Islam wants to unite all the human race under one code of life and presents a message of hope and a glorious future for its followers. According to Holy Prophet Pbuh, respect God and be affectionate to the family of God. Islam leads man to a unification of all aspects of life. It's a universal religion which stresses on the equality of all human beings with basic equal rights for all. It is a dynamic belief and a revolutionary doctrine. It means that all men are the creatures of one God. Discrimination based on color, class, race or territory is unfounded and illusionary. It is remnant of the days of ignorance which chained men down to servitude. Humanity is one single family of God and there can be no sanction for those barriers. Men are one and gives a revolutionary concept of the unity of mankind. Deen and Mazhab. Difference and concept that Islam is not a religion or mazhab but a deen, a complete code of life. Meaning of deen. Allah says, "Certainly, the religion deen with Allah is the submission, Islam, to His will and guidance. Those who had been given the book of laws differed only after knowledge had come to them, through transgression among themselves. Whoever rejects Allah, His revealed verses, will certainly find Allah swift at wrecking, will be punished." This shows that the beliefs and the practices in life should be based on obedience of God's guidance through revelations. The word deen is generally translated as religion, but actually it means the beliefs of one about conducting affairs in life and the practices in accordance with those beliefs in the society as a community and not only personally. Religion gives the impression of belief in God and following Him without any concern with the society, but for one's good in the life after death. Whereas, in deen, we follow God's guidance in this life as a whole nation and expect the rewards in this life as well as in the hereafter. Deen means obedience to God's laws, the true faith, the religion, J. Penrice, moral laws, M. Assad. Hence, deen means a code of life given by God, and religion means faith in God and His worship ritually, which has nothing to do with man's actions in the society as a whole. Religion is defined as belief in God or gods, divine powers to be obeyed and worshipped as a ruler or rulers, and the expression of such a belief in conduct and ritual. It is also defined as a system of specific belief and worship, often involving a code of ethics and a philosophy such as humanism as a religion. For religion, the Arabic word is mazhab, a way of living according to one's beliefs. But deen implies a code of life given by God, instead of human beings. In mazhab, human beings set the laws according to their understanding of the hadith or fiqh. These laws may not be in accordance with the Quran. They may be additional or different. The concept of deen covers the whole life and not just ritual worship or belief in God, whereas the concept of religion covers only belief in God and his worship ritually. It is considered a personal matter between a person and his or her God. But in deen, a nation has to follow the code of life collectively as well as personally. Thus the range of deen is much wider and covers all actions, public and private. Hence the right word for deen in English is God's code of life given by his revealed word. Different concepts of deen. The Quran clearly explains that the true concept of deen is to follow God's guidance only, whereas the concept misconceived by human beings is belief in God and worshipping him ritually. Man's concept of deen has nothing much to do with following his commands about leading Onia life. God gave the deen to the prophets, but the human beings distorted the revealed message and replaced it with their own laws by changing God's laws. About the Jews doing so, the Quran says in, "Have you any hope, O Muhammad, that they, the Jews, will be true to you when a part of them used to change the word of God, his revealed message, after they had understood it, knowingly?" About additions and alterations in the word of God, the Quran says in, "Therefore, woe be to those who write the book of law with their own hands, and then say, this is from Allah, that they may purchase a small gain therewith. Woe unto them for that their hands have written, and woe unto them for that they earn thereby." Thus, we find that God gave his true deen to the human beings through the prophets, but they changed it by their own beliefs, saying that they were from God, thereby creating their own concept of deen. The pagan Arabs also believed in Abraham-'s deen, which had been distorted by their elders, and they believed in it as a true religion. But God clearly tells them that the true deen is one that is given by Muhammad, the true prophet of God. These two different concepts have been explained in Surah 109. It says, "Say, O disbeliever, I worship not that which you worship, nor will you worship that which I worship, and I will not worship that which you worship. Nor will you worship that which I worship. Unto you is your religion, deen, and unto me is my religion, deen." We find here that the Prophet's religion was the revealed word of God, and the pagan Arabs rejected it. Their religion was the belief in whatever their religious leaders told them about their gods and the practices to worship them. They had no place for good conduct. Only rituals were important things in their religion. But in the true religion of God, serving him by obeying his commands was important. The difference pointed out here is worship of God and the worship of gods considered as the daughters of God. Ibadah actually means service or working for the fulfillment of one's duties, which is real worship. In Arabic, abdun means a servant or slave. At that time the Prophet only followed commands such as avoiding shirk, not taking others as gods, whereas the pagan Arabs were engaged in ritual worship only, which is just lip service. The Jews were also following their religious leaders who had a distorted view of the revealed religion of God with changes made by them. In the true Islam, the ritual worship started after 13 years in Medina. The point here is that God's revealed message in the form of the Quran is the only true Islam and the true deen. The religious letters concept of the deen is their own opinions about God. They ask their followers to believe in those opinions and act accordingly in life. For example, the pagan Arabs asked them to consider the idols as the daughters of God who will intercede for them before him. Deen means the beliefs and practices as told by God through the Holy Prophet. This is that they should submit themselves to God's guidance and obey his commands given through the Prophet. It is not the religion of ritual worship only. The actual worship is the obedience to his commands. His command is to develop taqwa, doing their duty to God by following all his instructions given in the Quran, the revealed word of God. Islam and guidance. Another aspect of Islam is God's guidance that is to be followed by all Muslims. This guidance is mainly about how one should lead his or her life in this world. God has asked all to submit to whatever he says and not to follow the religious leaders who distort his message. As he says, "So if they dispute with you, O Muhammad, say, I have submitted my face, whole attention to Allah. And so have those who follow me. And say to those who have God's book to read and to those who have no book to read, do you submit to God? If they do, they are in the right guidance, but if they turn back, your duty is only to convey the message." Here everyone is told that the right way to believe and to act accordingly is to follow God's commands and not those of the religious leaders or their forefathers. They must all follow God's commands. This is the true religion, the beliefs and the practices enjoined upon by God. In 385, he says, "If anyone desires a religion, deen, other than submission to Allah, Islam, never will it be accepted of him, and in the hereafter, he will be among those who have lost." Thus we find that Islam is the only true religion acceptable to God, because man's concept of religion is a distorted and changed version of the true religion. The right way to believe and to adopt any faith and practice is to take the guidance from God. Hada in Arabic means to lead in the right way, to follow a right course of action. Hence God says that Islam, obedience to Him, is the only right way to lead one's life. God says, "So for those whom Allah wills to guide to the right path, He opens their breast to Islam. And for those whom He wills to leave them in their wrong path, He makes their breast close and constricted, as if they had to climb up to the skies. Thus does Allah lay abomination on those who refuse to believe." Here Islam is described as guidance from God. Everyone should obey God. This is the right thing to do. Man's religion is not God's religion. Man has made up his own faith and practices for his own interest or that of his own community, but God's religion is for the good of all human beings. It is the light from God, which makes all the beliefs and practices clear for Him. As God says, "Is one whose heart Allah has opened to submission to Him, Islam, so that he has received the light, guidance, from Allah, not better than one hard-hearted. Woe to those whose hearts are hardened against the remembrances of God, His message. They are manifestly wandering in error." Therefore one must obey God's commands and always remember them so that he may follow them, according to God. Allah has revealed the best statements, Ahsan al-Hadith, in the form of a book, consistent with itself, and repeating its teachings, whereat does creep the flesh of those who fear their Lord, and they don't disobey, so that their flesh and their hearts soften at Allah's remembrance of His message. Such is Allah's guidance, Huda Allah, wherewith He guides whom He wills. And him whom Allah sends astray, on the wrong path, for him there is no one to guide. Here God clarifies that man's religion is wrong and his religion, the code of life deen, is the right thing to follow. Islam is a complete code of life, a complete guide and a true embodiment of the principles God has given for the benefit for the whole humanity. Concept of Caliphate and its features in Islam. Caliphate and its role in history has been widely discussing today. According to some intelligentsia, it's a theocratic institution and Islamic thinkers say is Islamic political system. Nevertheless, in history, Caliphate has big role and it had golden memories of justice, tolerance and fraternity etc. But today Caliphate is misunderstood by its inheritors as well as opponents. What was the influence of Caliphate and the fundamental elements which were illustrated in the society? Several questions arose as remarked above. Quran says that Caliphate is trusteeship man which must have to implement through obeying his sovereignty. The rulers as well as the ruled are to act in accordance with Islamic Sharia. They cannot behave as independent and sovereign legislators with freedom to make and enact any laws they wish to. All their actions must correspond to the will of Allah who alone is the sovereign and the lawmaker. Basis of Islamic concept of Caliphate. It means the Western philosophy of democracy, not the democracy as form of governance, is not acceptable in Islam. Because it vests absolute power of legislation or sovereignty in the hands of people and their representatives. And Caliphate is based on Islamic concept of Tawhid, the belief in the oneness of Allah. Islam aims at subjecting the whole earth to the will of Zero Nay and the Creator, and to spread as possible as to obtain the grassroots influence through receiving its messages and demands by the people from all walks of life. Prophet Muhammad has illustrated the criteria and regulations of Caliphate. In Islamic perspective, the role of Khalifa is vital issue. Firstly, he must have to be aware that he is a slave of Allah. Equality of citizenship is significant in Islam. There is no division between ruler and the ruled. Prophet Muhammad PBUH is the exemplar who established the Islamic State in Arabia, which would always act as a guiding light for all times to come. Sir Thomas Arnold remarks, "Is no one similar to him in the world. The Prophet had been at pain and the same time head of the state and head of the church. The paramount control of political policy was in his hands. He received the ambassadors who brought the submission of the various Arab tribes, and he exercised supreme authority in military expeditions. He was at the same time supreme legislator and not only promulgated legal statutes but sat in judgment to decide cases, and against his decision there was no appeal." In addition to the performance of these offices of the administrative and political order as ruler, general, and judge, he was also revered as the inspired prophet of God, and the religious dogmas he enunciated were accepted by his followers as revelations of divine truth, in regard to which there could be no doubt or dispute. At the same time he performed the highest ecclesiastical functions, and as imam led the prayer in public worship at the canonical hours in the Mosque of Medina. Then it is meaning of Khalifa, and this responsibility which should have to implement is called Caliphate. Some refuse the totality of Islam and question the evidence of Caliphate. To them Caliphate is not a political order of Islam, and the Quran has indicates about the rule of Suleiman and David, as moreover Allah appreciated Bilqis the queen. But they were certainly prophets and ruled by orders of Allah. We interpret their rules through our contemporary reading. But we have to criticize them who were not similar to other empires, and it was given by Allah. There is no actually a certain type of governance which narrated by Islamic fundamental sources. Governance is in Islamic perspective to have tolerated and just that citizens live in equality and safety. The Holy Quran says human beings' abilities, governance, and other qualities are divine gifts. Those prophets agree the sovereignty of Allah. It means the label of kingdom is not the criteria for implication of Caliphate. And we should not read their regiments as the monarchies in the modern concept. The Quran and the traditions are silent about any specific method for electing Caliphate. The companions of the Prophet PBUH seem to have been guided by the concept of shura as enshrined in the Book of Allah 42:38. Shura or consultative council is therefore an important principle of the political theory of Islam. The Prophet PBUH and the rightly guided Khulafa followed this principle, though none of them ever tried to give any specific shape to it. Features of the Islamic State Caliphate. The crucial features of the Islamic State Caliphate had been discussing by prominent Islamic philosophers. Abul Ala Mududi, who is founder of Jamiat Islami and the guiding light of 20th century, has explained the framework of Islamic State. 1. The Islamic State is set up consciously by an independent people who surrender, by free will and pleasure, to the will of Allah and accept to be his vicegerent as well as act in accordance with his guidelines and principles as enshrined in the Quran and the Sunnah. 2. It is a theocracy in that it rests sovereignty in the hand of Allah but differs from it in its application. In theocracy the priestly class grabs all powers, whereas in Islamic State all the believers have the right to govern as vicegerents of Allah. 3. Islam agrees with democracy's principle, government by the people. However, it is against the Western concept of people's sovereignty. The Western philosophy of democracy gives people the right to legislate and regulate their lives as they want. But in Islamic democracy, if one is permitted to use this terminology, the legislature, the executive and the judiciary by the Sharia and can never go against it. 4. The Islamic State is an ideological state, hence it can be run only by the people who believe in its ideology. However, a people who do not believe in its ideology but are willing to live in its boundary and accept its laws, will be entitled to all the civic rights which the believers enjoy. 5. The Islamic State will provide equality to all its citizens regardless of their color, race, language and their regional identity. Anybody wherever she lives is entitled to its citizenship if she believes in its ideology and abides by its laws and principles. A government or state established on these principles in any part of the world would be an Islamic state. This Islamic state can become a universal Islamic state, or there can be more than one Islamic state. However, they ought to cooperate with each other without seeking confrontation, and if possible, they can establish a confederation of the Islamic states. 6. The polity in such an Islamic state would be moral and selfless, wherein people would not seek to lobby for or advance one's personal interests or the cause of the groups they belong to. Faithfulness, honesty, justice, love of peace and keeping one's words in all national and international matters will be its hallmark. 7. The Islamic State will not be a police state in that it focuses only on law and order, or border security and other such matters. In fact, it will be a state with a purpose. It will be committed to enjoin good and forbid evil. Everybody will be before law and the welfare of people will be ensured. 8. The Islamic State will maintain a fine balance between the individual and the state by binding the both with rights and duties and thus preventing them from indulging in excesses against one another. This framework of Islam gives the citizens to live peacefully and communicate with freedom. In fact, the Islamic concept of Khilafat which submitted was the pioneer of the human rights. But the Islamic State has its own rules and regulations. No one can reject them. Hence, the Islamic State considers the non-believers as its own citizens and implements their own laws. Isolation and discrimination should be avoided in the Islamic State. Islamic culture had taught the entire world how to behave to the citizens and tolerate the inheritance of other religions and ideologies. Muhammad Marduk Pickthall writes, "In the eyes of history, religious toleration is the highest evidence of culture in a people. It was not until the Western nations breaks away from their religious law that they become more tolerant, and it was only when the Muslims fell away from their religious law that they declined in tolerance and other evidences of the highest culture. Before the coming of Islam its tolerance had never been preached as an essential part of religion. If Europe had known as much as of Islam, as Muslims knew of Christendom, in those mad, adventurous, occasionally chivalrous and heroic, but utterly fanatical outbreak known as the Crusades could not have taken place, for they were based on a complete misapprehension. Innumerable monasteries, with a wealth of treasure of which the worth has been calculated at not less than 100 millions sterling, enjoyed the benefit of the Holy Prophet's Muhammad charter to he monks of Sinai and were religiously respected by the Muslims. The various sects of Christians were represented in the Council of the Empire by the Patriarchs, on the Provincial and District Council by their bishops, in the Village Council by their priests, whose word was always taken without question on things which were the sole concern of their community. The tolerance within the body of Islam was, and is, something without parallel in history, class and race and color casing altogether to be barriers. Covenant of Medina for Jews and Christians. In history, we can read several human rights slogans as were in Magna Carta, which the West argued loudly and vociferously that world got the concept of basic rights from it. But before centuries ago Islam had proclaimed what the rights and its practical proofs. In Covenants of Medina, the great example of Islam's pluralistic perception, Muhammad, PBUH, could put the cornerstones of social justice and cooperation. Summary of this covenant is given below. The Muslims of Maraish, Yathrib and those who followed them, joined them, or fought with them, constitute one Ummah people, nation, community, to the exaltation of all others. Whosoever among the Jews follows us shall have help and equality. They shall not be injured or shall any enemy be aided against them. No separate peace will be made when the believers are fighting in the way Allah. The Jews are one Ummah with the Muslims. The Jews shall maintain their own religion and the Muslims theirs. Loyalty is a protection against treachery. The close friends of the Jews are as themselves. The Jews shall be responsible for their expenses and the believers for theirs. Each if attacked shall come to assistance of the other. The valley of Yathrib shall be sacred and inviolable for all that join treaty. Strangers under protection shall be treated on the same ground as their protectors, but no stranger shall be taken under protection except with the consent of his tribe. No woman shall be taken under protection without difference the consent of her family. Whatever difference or dispute between the parties to this covenant remains shall be referred to Allah and to Muhammad. Allah is the guarantor of the piety and goodness that is embodied in this covenant. The contracting parties are bound to help one another against any attack on Yathrib. If they are called to cease hostilities and to enter into peace, they shall be bound to do so in the interest of peace, and they make a similar demand, O Muslims, it must be carried out except when the war is against their religion. Allah approves the truth and goodwill of this covenant. This treaty shall not protect the unjust and the criminal. There was no separation between Muslims and non-believers except in the matter of tax. They had to give for exemption from military service. The Prophet recognized the Zoroastrians as people of book, and the treaty with the Christians was potential. In 628 CE the Prophet bestowed them a charter of privileges to the monks of St. Catherine Monastery in Mount Sinai. The nutshell of the charter for the Christians. This is a message from Muhammad bin Abdullah, as a covenant to those who adopt Christianity. Near and far, we are with them. Verily, I, the servants and helpers, and my followers defend them. Because Christians are my citizens and by Allah, I hold out against anything that displeases them. No compulsion is to be on them. Neither are their judges to be removed from their jobs, nor their monks from their monasteries. No one is to destroy a house of their religion, to damage it, or to carry anything from it to the Muslims' houses. Should anyone take any of these, he would spoil God's covenant and disobey his prophet. Verily they are my allies and have my secure charter against all they hate. No one is to force them to travel or to oblige them to fight, the Muslims are to fight for them. If a female Christian is married to a Muslim, it is not to take place without her approval. She is not to be prevented from visiting her church to pray. Their churches are to be respected. They are neither to be prevented from repairing them nor the sacredness of their covenants. No one of the nation, Muslims, is to disobey the covenant till the last day, end of the world. State and human rights. The Western states never can indicate a simple example of this sort of tolerance in their history. The Jews had been expelled from these Christian countries and they tried to invade the Muslim states for the centuries. They could not consider other believers. But the Muslims welcomed the Jews who expelled and give them the soul and soil to live without fear. Can a democratic state be a state of tolerance and peace, and can their citizens live in safety? But on looking at history, neither the democratic state keeps their slogans nor should their citizens be considered. India is its great instance. We argue that we are the great democratic country. We have a good constitution, but the continuity of riots and existence of classification between citizens are the paradoxical matters in our country. But Islam had established a pure Islamic state and announced the democratic values before the West and others did. Some basic principles of Islam had announced are given below. 1. The security of life and property. 2. The protection of honor. 3. The sanctity and security of private life. 4. The security of personal freedom. 5. The right to protest against tyranny. 6. Freedom of expression. 7. Freedom of association. 8. Freedom of conscience and conviction. 9. Protection of religious sentiments. 10. Protection from arbitrary imprisonment. 11. The right to basic necessities of life. 12. Equality before law. 13. Rulers not above the law. 14. The right to avoid sin. 15. The right to participate in the affairs of state. Democratic spirit of Islam. Islam refuses the democracy of West, which includes nihilism, and a Muslim who believes the sovereignty of God never can accept these socio-political ideologies. Because democracy of West claims sovereignty of people. In democratic country the riots, genocides and other cruelties are common happenings. We could not see the practical proofs of our great constitution yet, and domestic affairs are not be protected in proper way. But the domestic policy of Islam which the Prophet Muhammad (PBUH), there is no even a minute fault. The laws would be implemented on all those the state's citizenship whether they were Muslims or non-Muslims as follows. 1. All Islamic laws would be implemented upon the Muslims. 2. Non-Muslims would be interfered with regarding their beliefs and worship. 3. The non-Muslims would treat according to their beliefs in matters related to diet and adornment within the general framework of the law. 4. Disputes relate to marriage and according for divorce for non-Muslims would be dealt with by appointing judges from themselves in courts set up by the state and not in private courts. Similar disputes between them and the Muslims would be dealt with according to Islamic law by Muslim judges. 5. The state will enforce all other Sharia matters related to economic, social and legal transactions on every citizen, Muslims and non-Muslim alike, without prejudice. 6. All those who hold the Islamic citizenship as subjects of the state, their guardianship and the management of their are the duty of the state, without any discrimination. Ali Abd al-Razak (1888–1966), in his controversial reinterpretation of Islamic political thought, was actually first step of separation between religion and politics. He argued in his book, Al-Islam wa Usul Hukam, Islam and the Foundations of Government, that Islam did not specify a particular form of political system, nor did it require the caliphate. The Prophet was purely a spiritual leader, and Muslims had long suffered under the tyranny of a government that was supposedly ordained by either God's law or the will of the community of believers. Islamic world had not heard about the separation between the religion and politics before that argument. Democratic concept of Islam is very clear. Modern Islamic philosophers like Rashid al-Ghanouchi and Yusuf al-Qaradawi discuss the capability of Islam to include the democratic values. He says that Islamic rule is by nature democratic. Allama Yusuf al-Qaradawi says, "The fear of some people here that democracy makes the people a source of power and even legislation, although legislation as Allah's alone, should not be heeded here, because we are supposed to be speaking of a people that in Islam is its religion. Such a people would not be accepted to pass a legislation that contradicts Islam and its incontestable principles and conclusive rules." Anyway, these fears can be overcome by one article stipulating that any legislation contradicting the incontestable provisions of Islam shall be null and void, because Islam is the religion of the state and the source of legitimacy of all its institutions, and therefore may no be contradicted, as branch may not run against the mainstream. And other scholars like Muhammad Asad describes the leadership of state must be of an elective nature, and the consultative assembly must be both representative of the entire community, men, women, and the result of free and general election based on universal suffrage. Muhammad Iqbal and Maulana Maududi are guiding lights of modern Islamic era, narrated the flexibility of Islam. Maulana Maududi in his book, Political Theory of Islam, used the term theodemocracy for Islamic State. He accepted the democracy while this system will work under the sovereignty of God. Conclusion. Islam is not against the values of democracy and its acceptance among people. Islam takes care of entire development of human beings. It is main significant message of Islam. It is better to conclude with words of Sir George Bernard Shaw from his The Genuine Islam. If any religion had the chance of ruling over England, nay Europe within the next 100 years, it could be Islam. I have always held the religion of Muhammad in high estimation because of its wonderful vitality. It is only religion which appears to me to possess that assimilating capacity to the changing phase of existence which can make itself appeal to every age. I have studied him, the wonderful man. In my opinion, far from being an antichrist, he must be called the savior of humanity. I believe that if a man like him were to assume the dictatorship of the modern world, we would succeed in solving its problems in a way that would bring it the much-needed peace and happiness. I have prophesied about the faith of Muhammad that it would be acceptable to the Europe of tomorrow as it is beginning to be acceptable to the Europe of today. Introduction. The status of women in society is neither a new issue nor is it a fully settled one. The position of Islam on this issue has been among the subjects presented to the Western reader with the least objectivity. The Quran and the Hadith, properly and unbiasedly understood, provide the basic source of authentication for any position or view which is attributed to Islam. 2. Historical perspectives. Women in ancient civilization. Describing the status of the Indian woman, Encyclopaedia Britannica states. In India, subjection was a cardinal principle. Day and night must women be held by their protectors in a state of dependence, says Manu. The rule of inheritance was agnatic, that is, descent traced through males to the exclusion of females. In Hindu scriptures, the description of a good wife is as follows: a woman whose mind, speech and body are kept in subjection, acquires high renown in this world, and, in the next, the same abode with her husband. In Athens, women were not better off than either the Indian or the Roman women. Athenian women were always minors, subject to some male, to their father, to their brother, or to some of their male kin. Her consent in marriage was not generally thought to be necessary, and she was obliged to submit to the wishes of her parents, and receive from them her husband and her lord, even though he were stranger to her. A Roman wife was described by an historian as a babe, a minor, a ward, a person incapable of doing or acting anything according to her own individual taste, a person continually under the tutelage and guardianship of her husband. In the Encyclopaedia Britannica, we find a summary of the legal status of women in the Roman civilization. In Roman law, a woman was even in historic times completely dependent. If married, she and her property passed into the power of her husband. The wife was the purchased property of her husband, and like a slave acquired only for his benefit. A woman could not exercise any civil or public office, could not be a witness, surety, tutor, or curator. She could not adopt or be adopted, or make will or contract. Among the Scandinavian races, women were under perpetual tutelage, whether married or unmarried. As late as the Code of Christian V, at the end of the 17th century, it was enacted that if a woman married without the consent of her tutor, he might have, if he wished, administration and usufruct of her goods during her life. According to the English common law, all real property which a wife held at the time of a marriage became a possession of her husband. He was entitled to the rent from the land and to any profit which might be made from operating the estate during the joint life of the spouses. As time passed, the English courts devised means to forbid a husband's transferring real property without the consent of his wife, but he still retained the right to manage it and to receive the money which it produced. As to a wife's personal property, the husband's power was complete. He had the right to spend it as he saw fit. Only by the late 19th century did the situation start to improve. By a series of acts starting with the Married Women's Property Act in 1870, amended in 1882 and 1887, married women achieved the right to own property and to enter contracts on a par with spinsters, widows, and divorcees. As late as the 19th century, an authority in ancient law, Sir Henry Maine, wrote, "No society which preserves any tincture of Christian institutions is likely to restore to married women the personal liberty conferred on them by the Middle Roman law." In his essay The Subjection of Women, John Stuart Mill wrote, "We are continually told that civilization and Christianity have restored to the woman her just rights. Meanwhile the wife is the actual bondservant of her husband, no less so, as far as the legal obligation goes, than slaves commonly so called." Before moving on to the Quranic decrees concerning the status of woman, a few biblical decrees may shed more light on the subject, thus providing a better basis for an impartial evaluation. In the Mosaic Law, the wife was betrothed. Explaining this concept, the Encyclopaedia Biblica states, "To betroth a wife to oneself meant simply to acquire possession of her by payment of the purchase money. The betrothed is a girl for whom the purchase money has been paid." From the legal point of view, the consent of the girl was not necessary for the validation of her marriage. The girl's consent is unnecessary and the need for it is nowhere suggested in the law. As to the right of divorce, We read in the Encyclopedia Biblica, the woman being man's property, his right to divorce her follows as a matter of course. The right to divorce was held only by man. In the Mosaic law, divorce was a privilege of the husband only. The position of the Christian Church until recent centuries seems to have been influenced by both the Mosaic law and by the streams of thought that were dominant in its contemporary cultures. In their book, Marriage East and West, David and Vera Mace wrote, "Let no one suppose, either, that our Christian heritage is free of such slighting judgments. It would be hard to find anywhere a collection of more degrading references to the female sex than the early church fathers provide." Lecky, the famous historian, speaks of these fierce incentives which formed so conspicuous and so grotesque a portion of the writing of the fathers. Woman was represented as the door of hell, as the mother of all human ills. She should be ashamed at the very thought that she is a woman. She should live in continual penance on account of the curses she has brought upon the world. She should be ashamed of her dress, for it is the memorial of her fall. She should be especially ashamed of her beauty, for it is the most potent instrument of the devil. One of the most scathing of these attacks on woman is that of Tertullian. "Do you know that you are each an Eve? The sentence of God on this sex of yours lives in this age. The guilt must of necessity live too. You are the devil's gateway. You are the unsealer of that forbidden tree. You are the first deserters of the divine law. You are she who persuades him whom the devil was not valiant enough to attack. You destroyed so easily God's image, man. On account of your desert that is death, even the sop of God had to die." Not only did the Church affirm the inferior status of woman, it deprived her of legal rights she had previously enjoyed. 3. Woman in Islam. In the midst of the darkness that engulfed the world, the divine revelation echoed in the wide desert of Arabia with a fresh, noble, and universal message to humanity. O mankind, keep your duty to your Lord who created you from a single soul and from it created its mate, of same kind, and from them twain has spread a multitude of men and women. Quran 4:1. A scholar who pondered about this verse states, "It is believed that there is no text, old or new, that deals with the humanity of the woman from all aspects with such amazing brevity, eloquence, depth, and originality as this divine decree." Stressing this noble and natural conception, the Quran states, "He, God, it is who did create you from a single soul and therefrom did create his mate, that he might dwell with her in love." Quran 7:189. "The creator of heavens and earth, he has made for you pairs from among yourselves." Quran 42:1-1. "And Allah has given you mates of your own nature, and has given you from your mates children and grandchildren, and has made provision of good things for you. Is it then in vanity that they believe and in the grace of God that they disbelieve?" Quran 16:72. The rest of this paper outlines the position of Islam regarding the status of woman in society from its various aspects spiritually, socially, economically and politically. 1. The spiritual aspect. The Quran provides clear-cut evidence that woman is completely equated with man in the sight of God in terms of her rights and responsibilities. The Quran states, "Every soul will be held in pledge for its deeds." Quran 74:38. It also states, "So their Lord accepted their prayers, saying, I will not suffer to be lost the work of any of you whether male or female. You proceed one from another." Quran 3:195.